Beautiful.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our Sense of Belonging podcast. It is episode 3. As a reminder, I'm Hydeia.
I'm Kendall.
And we are Hackworth Fellows of the Markkula Center.
Markkula, yes.
We found out probably in previous videos we pronounced it Markkula Center. That is absolutely incorrect. It's Markkula.
And it's only taken us a year to figure this out.
But
here we are.
So excited because we have another special guest with us for our Sense of Belonging podcast.
Yes. So this is Kim Lear. I met her actually through my dad a few months ago, and we got on the Zoom call. I didn't really know much of what she did, but we ended up talking for probably an hour and a half about just, I think, my college experience, about what she does. And I'm not going to put words in her mouth because I have a feeling you have a beautiful way of explaining it. So why don't we pass it over to you and you can explain a little bit about what you do.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. It is so nice to be here with both of you. So my background is in sociology, demography, and I mostly study this topic of generations. And so I specifically focus on like change over time. And so looking at how the experience of being old in America changes over time, the experience of being young in America. So the studies are mostly these longitudinal studies where, and some of them I inherited from other researchers that I worked for, where, if you're on college campus in 1972 and you're talking to eight, oh, is there a little bit of feedback or is this okay? Okay, good. So if you're on a college campus in 1972 asking college students about their views on sex and relationships and aspirations and goals and justice and politics and all these things, versus if you do it today, part of what we're looking at is what changes, and then also equally important, what stays the same. What are the consistencies of being young and the things that everyone grapples with at this really fundamental stage. So these are the types of this is the type of research that I run. And when Kendall and I were speaking, a lot of the conversation kind of centered around my most recent study, which kicked off in 2020, and it's with the 60 college students representing 40 states. And I started with them. Most of them were freshmen in college. Some of them were seniors in high school, but it was 2020, so a lot of people took gap years. And then they stay with me for 10 years. And I'm looking at some of Gen Z's, especially of that year, their like unceremonious catapult into adulthood and their story of being starting college in 2020 and what that was like and how they finished school and where they decided to work and why and how their aspirations evolve over time and all of that. And so we can take this anywhere. And I love this theme of belonging because it's also one of those things where when we look at things of like what is consistent across generations, age groups, ethnicities, all of these things, it's like all people need belonging. But what is generational is over time, there are different tools to facilitate belonging. There are different tools that break down belonging. There are different ways in which we feel connected to one another and different ways in which we are torn away from each other. And so there's a lot even that we can unpack with that.
The work you're doing is so amazing. And I feel like that kind of brought up a question for me of like when you started this work, was it really the pandemic that like fueled it, or were you already thinking about this topic a little bit since like your study or like your specialty is like studying generational trends? Was it something you were already like formulating, like, hey, this will be like an interesting project, and then the pandemic came in and added like another layer or dimension, or what really got you interested at the start of this study?
Well, I've been studying this topic for 15 years. And so these studies, I've been doing them. With the pandemic specifically, I work really closely with someone who kind of does what I do in China, a very close friend. And back at like the end of 2019, I was like 8 months pregnant, and he's like telling me what's going on in Wuhan, and I'm like, this isn't good. But I did take this like moment before maternity leave to just whatever was going to happen in America, I wanted to capture as much as I could in real time, because we never remember things correctly. And so when you're recording stories, you want to do it right away. Um, and so that was the impetus. And so the recordings began in May of 2020. So it was really just as like, so the stories of like, oh, I packed up my stuff and went home for spring break. And then I like stayed home for 2 years. And, just these stories, it was, but they didn't know they were going to be staying home for 2 years. Even in the year one interviews, I wanted to capture that moment of total unease. And this kind of pandemic time capsule that I created, I did it with every age cohort, but I started with the college students because it was such a unique moment of so many young people like moving back home into their childhood bedrooms as they're trying to figure out like, who am I and what do I believe in? And it's really meant to be this time of so much experimentation and so many mistakes and so much growth. But instead, it was just like home alone. So,
Uh,
yeah.
really wild to like think, and I think it's like that real story, because it's one thing to actually capture those stories and you're living in it, versus if you started the study now and was like, oh my gosh, 4 years ago, I remember when that happened, but really like capturing that like uneasy feeling of like you don't know what's gonna happen. And especially I feel like the end of high school, beginning of college time is so exciting, because it's something I feel like a lot of people dream about. You're like, oh my gosh, when I'm like 18, I want to move away. I want to do X, Y, and Z with my life. And I feel like college is such a time of like exploration and figuring out like who you are, and is like really like developing your personhood. And as people say, it's like the most formative years of your life, because it's, you're around so many of the same people for like 18 years. You're around your parents, you're around your family for 18 years. And it's like the first time in your life you do have a chance to like move away. It's like, who am I as a person without like these familial influences, without my friends' influences? And then boom, the pandemic happens, and
Says,
like,
nah.
all that you dreamed of is like
Yeah.
over in a
Right,
sense.
yeah.
So it's like so interesting that you captured that in like real time. I think it's like so amazing.
Yeah, I think the most
Yeah.
interesting part was like the fact you said, like at that time, like that is when you're supposed to grow and explore the most. And I feel like with my experience, like it just made me think like, oh, that makes so much sense why it felt like it took so long for me to figure myself out, because there was such a large chunk of time where like it was just paused. Like there was no ability to like explore or experiment. Like my freshman year was literally sitting in an apartment like 12 hours a day doing Zoom. There was no self exploration there. Yeah. And I
And
assume for a lot of people too, like they still haven't gotten to that point because of what happened.
well, and I think we forget how these huge moments, there are these weird ripple effects and unintended consequences that we don't necessarily think about. But one of the big ones is just we spent so much time on our phones during the pandemic. And um and some of these habits, they just calcify, like the amount of entertainment that we consumed really collectively. But there's always a difference in that very, formative brain moment in, that kind of 18 to 25-year-old age range of all of that growth that is happening. And so there was just some of these habits that really changed, that in so many circles have really remained. And that has some ripple effects as well.
Absolutely. I'm wondering too on like the social media piece, because I really like, it's something that like I inherently like, wow, we really were like on our phones like all the time, like on like Zoom all the time. And I'm wondering like when you met like with these students and like sat down with them, did they feel like more, like what was that kind of like sense of community or unity that they were finding? Because I feel like a lot of times like social media is like good and bad in like various ways, but like one of the, I feel like, big positives for people sometimes is finding like communities that, you know, you might not have in your hometown or things of that sort. How did they like develop community? And especially if like those who decide like not to take a gap year, I was like, oh, I'll just go ahead and like, you know, push forward with like what my classes, how did they like develop that sense of unity? Because I feel like it's so easy to like, and you see it now, even when things are like Zoom classes, like everybody, it's the big like black boxes, no one has their camera on, you know, you go to the breakout rooms to, you know, work on classwork and no one's talking, you're just waiting for the professor to be like, okay, time's up. So how did students like find that like community or like unity? Was social media like a big part of that, where did they have to take like an extra mile in order to like make friendships in classes and still kind of make a college experience?
Yeah, I mean, for some, I think that there was that real sense of camaraderie for the people who did. There are a lot of people where they maybe moved back to campus and they did their complete virtual school, but like they did not want to stay home or at home. Maybe one of their parents, this was more common than I expected. One of their parents was maybe really immunocompromised. And so there was, you know, there were these other factors to think about. But in terms of that sense of belonging, I think for some there was that sense of like we were kind of in the trenches together. Like we built this pod and we moved back and we stuck together, and there's that component. But also sort of the interesting thing is that in a more traditional college experience, the people who you friend freshman year of college, usually that's not who you graduate with as your best friends. There's kind of a natural maturation process that happens, and a lot of times those freshman year friendships they I don't want any of the listeners to be like, but my best friend is from freshman year, because that happens. But a lot of times there's a very geographical component to that, where it's like you know, your room was next to me, whatever that is. And and some of these people, if they evacuated campus in March of 2020, then they left campus with the friends that they made first semester freshman year. They came back to campus junior year, and those were still their friends.
Mhm.
And then there were kind of a lot of like friendship explosions in a way, because there wasn't like the natural pruning process. It was more like, oh my gosh, my 18-year-old self became friends with you, and my 20-year-old self is very uninterested in this friendship, which is very natural, but usually you have more time to make those decisions. The exit ramps of those relationships are more organic, where when it was compressed in this weird way, it created some of these like friendship group explosions. So I think that, you know, so to answer your question of like where were some communities forming, and then with social media, there are so many amazing examples of people who have built these remarkable communities that have gone across boundaries and gone across time zones. And so they do exist. 2020 was a brutal time in social media, partly because there was the pandemic, and then that summer George Floyd was killed. And then and so um, more of that, especially in 2020, it was less community formation, and it was a lot of like the doom. It was a lot of the just really anxiety provoking components. And so it exists, but there was a lot of labor that would have to go into the real development and growth of those online communities. And you had to bypass a lot of the constant stream of really really hard content to digest.
Absolutely. That's so interesting to the, I don't know, that piece of like the friendships, because I think like that, like the mindset that you're in is like so different. Like you're like developmentally like growing, but then like the friendship wise, like you're kind of coming back like junior year and like in terms of standing, but you might still have like the mindset of what you would be like second semester freshman. And like when things seem like much more like explosive to when you talk about those explosive friendships, because like, oh my gosh, like this issue seems so petty, or this seems so like juvenile, but something that would have like exploded like freshman year, but like, oh, that was such a freshman year thing, and like experiencing it later in life, I think is like so interesting, because again, like those formative years of, the people you might come in with might not be the people you walk out with, but if that's like who all you knew. And then I feel like, especially with college being so like seeming so fast paced, and it's like could be the best 4 years of your life, but also some of the fastest 4 years of your life, that it's like you don't want to like start over like junior year and say, okay, this is the whole group that I like knew since the pandemic. These are the people who I've been like riding with, but then you don't know any better. Like it seems so like late, because you had that whole like sophomore year gone. Like it seems so late to like, okay, let me pick up, let me start over, let me find a new group. And that could be such a scary thing to like, are you gonna stay in these kind of like toxic friendships if like I don't have like enough time left? Like I think that's just so
or
interesting.
explore yourself more.
Yeah.
I feel like that was kind of my experience to some extent, except it was like I didn't have freshman year, and then like the people, well, I had freshman year, but it was like I was in an apartment and there was only like 200 kids in our grade. So those were like the people that like that version of myself became friends with, and then that all exploded, and I was forced to like start over basically end of my sophomore year, end of junior year, and felt like I had like lost a lot of time, but like also like very happy that that happened, because it allowed me to grow. I think if I had stayed within those like friendships that I created when I was like in that like alienated space, I don't think that would have benefited me. I think it would have just like kind of kept me in this like bacteria cell where like everyone was kind of dependent on each other in an odd way, where like it wasn't particularly healthy. And then kind of being let out of that, I was able to be kind of alone, which in the best way possible, but it allowed me to explore everything, which was amazing. But I don't know, I guess like one of my main questions, I think about the pandemic, and I think about how we were all pretty much alone and very reliant on technology, and just kind of like all we really knew was like our phones and ourselves, and that was for like a year or two. And then when I think about how I perceive like the people around me now, it feels like there is a deep connection between like how people interact socially today with like how they were interacting socially in the pandemic. And I feel like this over reliance on social media, and this like over reliance like on, or not over reliance, but like this like fear of like kind of being like vulnerable and being around people all the time hasn't disappeared at all since the pandemic. If anything, I feel like the world has kind of capitalized on it, and like created more types of technologies and more types of systems that kind of alienate people more, make it more difficult to feel like you belong and feel like there's community. I'd be curious to hear what you think, or like whether that's like something you've seen like happen, I guess, over time.
Yeah, it definitely has. And so I'll tell you the like depressing part and then the good part. And then I'm curious what like what you guys what you both do, because I know that a lot of young people that I've talked to, their relationship to their phones, their relationship to social media has really intentionally changed. And I'm kind of curious if there's different things that you've done. But yeah, I mean, the sad part is that people have spent way more time on their phones and in social media. And Cheryl Turkle, she's a professor at MIT, and she's been writing about this topic forever, kind of like the mother of understanding how technology impacts children, adolescents, all these things. And she has said, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little feedback, so tell me if this is annoying or not. Okay. She said, we're never like we always have one part of us somewhere else. And that was like the big shift in the phone and in social media, and that whole ability to like always be a little bit elsewhere. And and then just being in person with people and building community in that way, just like you said, I like that you used the word vulnerable, because it's a combination of it requires a lot of vulnerability. It also requires sometimes sitting with a lot of boredom and you know, just like other stuff where it's like sometimes you are just like you're at a party and you're stuck in a conversation with someone who is like genuinely boring, and you just have to get over it and be like, I don't want to be rude, and I'm gonna talk to you for a few minutes, and then I'll pretend to go to the bathroom or whatever it is. But like it's filled with these moments that can be really uncomfortable. And but it's that muscle. It is that muscle of just doing uncomfortable things over and over again that it just kind of it builds, and it gives you that stamina to just do it. I'm obsessed with both of your faces right now. Um, um yeah. And so um yeah, and then I would say that the part that does make me really hopeful is that in so many of the conversations that I have with young people today, there is some of a reflection of their own childhoods and almost the sense of like, where were the grown-ups? Like that for a Gen Zer, the average Gen Zer got a smartphone when they were 11, and they didn't buy that for themselves, right? And so
Mm.
a little of this question of like, why were we allowed to do this? And I think that that is interesting. And every generation has that. Every generation reflects on something and is like, where were the adults in the room? And why was this so permissive? Um, so there's that happening. And then there is, I think, some of this like you know, and then trying to get it under control. And the part, and when I'm you know, when I'm with clients, when I'm with organizations or universities or parents, you know, whoever it is, there is sometimes this idea where they're like these young people and they're just like they're always on their phone and they're so dependent on it. It is this constant complaint that we hear. And then I do have to remind them of this, of like these algorithms are built by very smart people who build these in order to specifically tap into our psychological weaknesses, and even people with fully formed frontal cortexes cannot control themselves around it. And then we gave them to 11-year-olds and just hoped that they could exercise a type of self-discipline that adults could not exercise. And so there is I obviously get kind of heated about it just because I'm like, this isn't, you know, no generation of young people made this decision or walked down this path really consciously, but now they are consciously exiting in a way of really trying to figure out what are the amazing things about social media, which are many, and what are the pieces of this that make me absolutely miserable and feel more disconnected and more alone, and how do I rein that in for myself? But I'm curious what you see and like what you experience and what you've done for yourself on this topic.
Well, I feel like all that information was like very valuable because I think especially like the concept of like a screenager is like very like evident. And then I feel like I was definitely one of those people who had like a phone very young and like thinking about like the implications of that. Cause I even think back to like middle school having a phone, and then I didn't have social media till like the middle of middle school. So maybe it was like seventh grade or early like eighth grade. But it's so crazy because like thinking like back to it, like it was something that like my family only had like Facebook at most. And so I was like Instagram, Snapchat. And then I think about how like certain things would have like privacy settings, but then you wouldn't be, or like kind of like parental controls. But if you told your like real age, but then if you like added a couple years, you know, put a 19 in front of it, then you get like all full access. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's so crazy. And I think about like the implications of like how I guess like Instagram try to like make it a little better, but like when you used to like a post, like now it's like, oh, view likes, or it's like, oh, these two people liked it, and you can like view others because of like how much people were so like based on likes. I remember being in middle school having Instagram, and I would, you know, post like whatever cringiest like post, and it would make me so excited from when the numbers went from everybody, or the likes went from everybody's names to it changed to a number, because you had like 10 or more likes. And like basically like, oh my gosh, like I'm so popular because I got 10 likes on my post, and like now it goes from like names to like numbers. And I feel like little things like that, you know what I mean? And then you get older and you're like, that I think that's why there's so many like things of people basing off like, oh my gosh, am I like worthy enough? Am I like this enough? And finding like who's my sense of self based on other people's opinions. Because and I just like didn't even remember that until like you started talking. I was like, oh my gosh, like this makes so much sense. But like now being like older, it's like, okay, if I post a picture, it's not for my followers. I'm posting because, oh, I like this picture. Oh, I want to share like an experience of like what I'm doing with people. And so it's like not looking like scrolling up, saying, oh my gosh, did anybody comment? Did anybody like, as I would have done when I was younger? But like, oh, okay, like I want to post something because it's like, oh, I want to other people to experience like something I'm experiencing like that community. Oh my gosh, I know people are gonna like this. Or if you see a post, like, oh, I'm gonna send it to my friend because I feel like they would like this, and like kind of building like community that would like, oh my gosh, I saw this post, now I think of you, versus it being like, oh my gosh, I want this like kind of media to fuel me and like make me feel good. Because I think then that comes in like whole like psychology branch of like, oh, self-esteem, like sense of self, and like how are you basing your sense of self on that, which I think is like so crazy. And I think like now it's more, I feel like using social media more as like a tool, because yes, you do have that community component. It's nice, like, oh, I haven't seen people since elementary or high school, and like now you're like, oh, their world is at your fingertips. But then I think a lot of things, especially like think like post 2020, is where like a lot of like activism came in. And I mean, I guess you can kind of get like two sides of like, you know, performative activism and like actual activism kind of thing. But I think when we focus on that actual activism piece, because I think there's so much always going on in the world that it's like you can be so much in your bubble, you're like, oh, life is good over here, and like not being so oblivious and kind of having those blinders on where you're not seeing anything else going on in the world. And I feel like I've been educated so much by like friends sharing posts of things going on in the world, or being able to educate myself so easily because of like social media, and using it more as a tool versus like using it as a self-esteem booster.
Yeah. For me, my parents, so I did get a phone when I was young, but
Wait, and but
wasn't-
I have to interject just to say I'm not at all throwing
Okay.
anyone's parents under the because almost but to your point, when you're like they had Facebook and then like I got my phone, it's like Instagram. So like parents had no idea, and so so I'm not at all like, look, like you did this intentionally. So I just, especially because I know Kendall's dad, I don't want him to listen to this be like, oh my gosh, like no.
Somehow they were psychics, because I was not allowed to use anything or do anything like at all. I wasn't allowed to have social media until I was like beginning, like mid of high school. And I like every night throughout high school, I had to like leave my phone downstairs, like stuff like that. I didn't have like an iPad, like nothing. I think the closest thing to technology I had when I was young was like a PC computer that like allowed me to like, I don't know, like go on that like doodle, whatever. I don't know if you remember it, but there's like I could do art on the computer. That was fun. So for me, I felt like, because my mom like always just like really like valued authenticity and felt like the use of social media was gonna like impact like who I was as a person. And in my opinion, and she was right, as much as I hate to admit that. So I feel like as I grew up, like the people around me like always had social media and always like knew what was going on, where I was just kind of like out of the loop and like didn't really like get it. Like I didn't understand the language. I didn't understand like what was going on. And I felt like it made me feel not separated, but it was like I felt like they had a different part of themselves that I didn't have. And I didn't really understand like that dynamic, kind of like the quote you mentioned, where I didn't have that like Kendall on the phone. Like I just had Kendall here, and like the only things impacting Kendall here were like my experiences in the real world. And I feel like that I don't know, this is just me thinking out loud, may have like honestly impact like my ability to connect with people around me in high school. I feel like I was, I felt very misunderstood by the people around me, and like they perceived me as inauthentic and ingenuine when I was like the opposite of that. And I had like, yeah, I struggled a lot socially because of that. And I don't know if like part of that has to do with like media or like how I was raised, but I assume a lot of it probably does. But yeah, then when I got to college, I obviously like at that point I kind of had everything, and but I don't know, it kind of like stuck with me. Like I've had TikTok a few times, but every time, like now it's been 4 months since I had it, and like every time I get it, I end up deleting it because I realize I'm like, the second that you have like a second to breathe, your brain has a second to breathe, you go on something that stimulates you more. And just in realizing that, I'm just like, you can't keep this app. Like you can't rationalize that at all. Like if you can't pick up a book, like before you go to bed and you have to like scroll, like that's a problem. And like, if you can realize that, like you can't have this app. So yeah, and then with like, I don't know, with other stuff, like I enjoy like the creativity that like Instagram allows me to have. Like I love like sharing my photography, or like having a food Instagram and like using it for like self-expression and blogging purposes. But I think like the main thing I feel in college that has affected like kind of the sense of belonging relationships is how people's identities, like the way people perceive like other people, is like they see the Kendall on social media and they don't really see as much the Kendall in real life, because they see the Kendall on social media and they're like, oh, she does this, like she's like this. They make their own ideas and assumptions about who I am as a person. So then when it comes to real life Kendall, that's how they think I am. And it's not their fault, but it's like, oh, like I know you like because of who you are in social media. I'm like, well, no, you don't. So I think it creates this like really like large disconnect between people, because we have these images of them in our minds, and it makes people so much less inclined to like actually get to know the people around them, because they already subconsciously like think like, oh, I know this person, but they don't. And I feel like with just like sense of belonging, I feel like that must and definitely prevents people from like feeling like they belong, because it's like, well, people don't know you like that. You need to feel understood and like seen and like known as a person to feel like you belong somewhere. Like otherwise it's just like an alien. Yeah.
That's so true. And that's there was even in, I don't know if you do like notes on the podcast, but I can link to it. There was also an interesting study that was done about even the disconnect between like who you portray on social media and who you are in real life, and like almost this phenomenon of jealousy towards your like internet self. And the idea of and it's an interesting study of looking at the relationship between kind of the branded self and mask, and then the real person. So it obviously it impacts the relationship between two individuals, but also between the individual and themselves in a weird way. um I am curious with the belonging piece, because so much of one of the things that has stayed very consistent in the formation of communities is shared experiences. And you like one thing that came up was about the like Zoom classes and everyone on, that's just like black boxes and that whole thing. And on a college campus, one of the most like shared experiences obviously is just like in-person class and kind of going through like that struggle together and the test prep together and that type of thing. It's part of the like fraternity and sorority thing, or the clubs piece and the going out and all of that. And so I'm I am curious that like shared experiences that you have developed with people, and like what it is that you gathered around, and how that has shaped your group of friends or your ability to feel connected.
I would say definitely at Santa Clara, like Students here are like extremely ambitious. Like I feel that we are a very involved campus, so it's very hard to find people who like only go to school, only go to class and then go home. Like very much people have like a couple like extracurriculars under their belts, they have like jobs under their belts and like just very multifaceted people. So I think in my classes, like I've met like wonderful people, strengthened like friendships of people I might have seen around campus. Maybe we do like follow each other on like Instagram or something, but then we're in a class. I'm like, oh my gosh, this person is really cool. But I think definitely like the shared experiences of like clubs, I think have where I found like my strongest friendships, or even like work experiences. Cause I know, which is I think so interesting. I was an orientation leader for 2 years, which I think one thing in that role is all about making people feel like they made the right choice of coming to school, coming to Santa Clara, making people feel like this is, you can see yourself here, like you belong here. Here, throwing so many resources, throwing so many people at you at so many times, like, oh my gosh, the person next to you could be your best friend, the person next to you could be your roommate, the person next to you could be in your class. And I think that's like such an interesting position. I think even the people that I worked with on that job have been some of my greatest friends. Like someone who I worked with, is she's now my roommate, and I like absolutely like adore her and like in that position. And I think it's very much a culture of like people wanting each other to win and wanting each other to succeed. And I think like that's where like that community piece comes in. Cause I feel like even being in spaces where like being like admissions ambassador, like your job is to sell the school, right? So you want to like tell people like the best of the best. Of course you want to be honest, and you don't want to like lie. And if you're having a terrible experience, like, oh yeah, this is the worst place I've ever been, you don't want people to like, have like a false narrative of what the school is. But I feel like what has been so consistent, even with like working with people on the admissions team who like were so different and like I've had so many different experiences, is like that sense of community. And I think like that has been like the biggest like part for me. I think that's where I found like sense of community is those shared experiences and things you can look back on and debrief at the end of the day and look back on and like laugh at the end of the day. It's like, oh my gosh, we went through this experience together. And I think, yeah, I think clubs have been like one of the strongest parts personally for me. Like even if it's like a once a week thing, like for 1 hour, having that time to be in a space with people who like relate in some aspect. And even if it's more of like a decompressing kind of like club kind of thing, not really having to put like any labor into it, it's just like a space to chill. I think that has been like the biggest like sense of community, has made me feel like I belong with, is kind of that feeling of like, oh, I found my people. Like I know like these people are my people. Like we're here for each other, we're writing for each other, we want to see each other succeed, I think has been the biggest thing.
Yeah, it's so interesting because like I feel like if you had asked me 2 years ago, like what's the culture like at Santa Clara, I would have said the exact opposite. I would have said like the people like are like lost and like don't have like any like ability to feel like motivated to put themselves out there in like club or community situations. And honestly, I'd be talking about myself as well. Like definitely like probably 2 3 years ago, like I just was like confused, lost. Like the only thing I had going, I mean my freshman year, it was like there was no club, so it was like it was like you got kind of used to like not having anything to do, like or not doing anything, like there was nothing to do. So like a lot of the people that I know still do the same thing they did every day during our freshman year and have not changed. And I think that's partially because they haven't been forced to, and it's very comfortable to just stay the same. I thankfully was kind of forced into a position where like I either like was gonna just do that, like continue doing that, like I was either gonna like leave Santa Clara, continue doing like nothing alone, or do things alone. So I kind of had to like make that decision, like, okay, do I want to just like sit alone and do nothing, or do I want to be alone and try something?
Yeah.
So that brings me, I guess, to where both connect on that is the clubs at Santa Clara, and like just putting yourself out there and like just figuring yourself out, like just seeing what you like, trying the radio station or trying out for club tennis or like our Hackworth Fellowship, like whatever it is. Like they're my closest friends, and the people who I like feel like have like a lust for life almost, and like really feel like they have a community, and to some extent at least are the people who have put themselves out there. But that frustrates me a little bit because I don't think it's necessarily fair that like it's like only the people who have the courage to put themselves out there like get this sense of belonging, where like these other people behind the scenes are like either like they've been put in situations that make it like much more difficult for them to put themselves out there, or like they like are in like a literal like cycle routine every day where it's like, why would I break that? Or like they're transfer students and they feel like there's no point or whatever it is. And I think that's what frustrated me, and what really like was the root for our podcast, honestly, in general, was like we have gotten to a point where like we like us as people like had the courage and like to like put ourselves out there and find like community, but like it's just not that easy to do that, and it should be easier. I think, and I don't think it's necessarily the university's fault. I think it's like a culture shift that would need to happen to like really give people that like confidence and like, I don't know, make them realize like that's what's gonna like make them feel good. If they're looking for community, if they're looking for belonging, like it's worth it to put yourself out there.
And I think that was like a big part, like as soon as you were talking, Kendall, I was thinking like that's really like the point of the podcast, is like trying to give like a voice to those almost who haven't been heard, because it's so easy to see people like when they like love Santa Clara or they have like a good experience or they're involved in some way, they're very much out and about. It's not hard to like we walked out right now, we can find someone who loves Santa Clara and be like, oh my gosh, this is the best experience I've had, best 4 years ever. Like it's so easy to find those kind of people, and like they're everywhere. But I think it's like very important for those who aren't having a good experience, because of course we want to highlight people like, yeah, I found sense of belonging, I've been in clubs, my 4 years has been great, yeah, I got involved, this was beautiful. But we really like do want to like highlight too people like, yeah, I haven't had the best time here, like, yeah, I don't really know what like a sense of belonging like feels like, I haven't like felt it here, or yeah, I had it in high school, but then I moved all the way across the country, didn't know what it felt like when I got here, kind of thing. So I think it's really like giving a voice to those who like don't feel it, and I think like also like highlight the importance of it, because I agree, like I don't think it's necessarily like the university's fault, because and then kind of going back what you're saying, it's like not fair that only those who put themselves out there are the ones who kind of like reap the benefits. But yeah, like there's so many resources, there's so many ways to get involved, there's so many ways to do X, Y, and Z. But sometimes it's like, okay, how can we do a better job, even like as students, to like not be superficial, like, oh my gosh, like we should grab lunch sometime, and then never follow up with that person, kind of thing. Like how can we like ensure that like we're actually being like genuine with intentions? Like how can we make sure that resources are like coming to students? How can we be a resource to students to like ensure like, yeah, people like, yeah, I might not have the best time, but that one person really made my day that day. Like, you know, it's like that saying, what is it, like people like not remember like what you said, but they'll always remember like how you made them feel. Like you can be like, oh yeah, we're gonna like grab lunch, and then you'd be like, okay, and then like it never happens. But it's like, yeah, okay, let's grab lunch. You follow up that person, have the greatest maybe like hour, 2 hour conversation. Maybe you never talk to them again, but it's like that moment. It's like, hey, like that person was a really good person, even if it's just a friendly face on campus. I think it's so important, because I think
if they see you at a club event, oh,
I know that person. Yeah, because it's a whole different experience when you are involved and you are having a good time versus like you're not involved and are you having a good time? Like how are you developing like that sense of self? Because if you're like, man, these were the most miserable 4 years of my life, like how does that impact, like, and that probably comes in where your work also like comes in. If you were like miserable for like a, you know, subset of like this time, and then it's like, how's that going to impact relationships that you have later in life? How is that going to impact how I am in the workforce? How like how do you make friends outside of college, kind of thing?
Well, I think that first of all, just by you two doing what you're doing, which is essentially just being courageous, that's contagious. And so, you know, there's things that you're already doing that just help other people. I can tell you that, you know, 15 years, I've done thousands of interviews, and not just with young people. I work across, you know, and looking at different life stages and what the experience of growing up and the experience of growing old. And maybe the most important lesson that even I have personally taken away from this is that there are just seasons. There are seasons of life and they change all the time. And there are some people where they find their forever people, they find their community in high school, and then college is really just an academic endeavor. And it's fine. And maybe it isn't where they find their forever people. And there are people where they make those forever relationships in adulthood or at another time. And so I think part of it is um, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And I think that like modern youth culture is a pressure cooker environment where there is a lot of pressure to know who you are, to know who your community is, to know the mark you want to make. And the reality is that it is just an ever evolving thing. And so if anyone is listening to this who's like, this isn't the best 4 years of my life so far, like I haven't really found my community. I also just want to give you permission to like take a deep breath and be like that's okay. And still put yourself out there and and it's in the trying. Like the trying in itself is fulfilling. But also not finding your forever people, your forever community in college is fine. People find their community in all kinds of different ways. And some of the most interesting people I've ever met in my life have the wackiest stories where they're like, oh, I did this. And then when I was 40, I went to seminary school. And then I was a pastor for 5 years. And I'm like, what? Like it's people make pivots and people make changes. And I think we forget. I think we forget the ability that we can always change course and we can always reach out and we can always access our courage at different times. And so it isn't just in the 4 years of college. And sometimes just even alleviating that pressure is a good thing. And and sometimes that's the best way to access your courage and your ability to come out of your shell is to be like, I might go to this lunch and might love it, might hate it, and it's okay. It's all good. Um, so I guess that is, and even in terms of, how it translates into the workplace. Because I'll tell you that, my 2020 cohort, most of them are in the workplace now, and some of them I've caught up with. And I will tell you that, like, you could not pay me enough money to be 22 again. Like, it's like 22, it's a tough moment of just going into the workforce for the very first time. And there's going to be these disappointments. There's going to be these things of you thought it was going to be this, you thought this was going to be your mark, you thought that this was going to light you up, and some things do and some things don't, and it's all a learning. And you land, you do find like your landing pad. But I would say that a lot of the young people that I've seen that have had the most successful catapult into the world of work, and I'm using the term successful like not not in like money and career trajectory and that type of thing, but like they're the people where like they went into every endeavor with just an insatiable sense of curiosity and willingness to learn and viewing all of that as this this journey that you're on, and knowing that some of it is just meant to be really hard, and that's part of it. And just before we started recording, Kendall and I were just talking about, your next stage and all of that. And I told you the best advice that I ever got, which especially at this stage, there's just no wrong moves. There's no wrong moves. You take a job that it's not right and you meet interesting people and you learn that it's not right and you course correct and you try something new or you find something that does light you up, and then but it doesn't pay you anything, and then when you're 25 you're like, I actually do want to be paid, and then you change that. Like there's a lot of different ways, a lot of different ways to make these choices. So but I I love what you're doing of this sense of, people who are not super extroverted, people who tapping into that courage of putting yourself out there is so paralyzingly terrifying. And I like that you're trying to give voice to that experience also. And I think you're leading by example of, sometimes you have to start over and sometimes you have to rebuild. And that just strengthens those muscles of resiliency that you need to, to make it.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Oh. So amazing.
no, that was like summed up just so beautifully.
Good. I'm glad. I'm so I really like what you guys are what you're doing, and it's so human. There's no person that you can talk to that reflects on this phase of their life without this bittersweet feeling where you remember that feeling of being really lost, really confused, stepping into a million different unknowns, but that the complete sense of like vitality and vibrancy that comes with that. Like you're buzzing because you're just like, what's going on? And that combination of feelings can be really powerful.
Yeah, the calm that comes out of the chaos.
Yes.
Yes, a little
Yes.
bit. Well, I feel like that's just a perfect way to end.
Great.
Like, I don't think I have anything more to say. Kim,
Yeah.
you're amazing. I do feel like we could talk forever.
Oh, 100%.
But I guess for the viewers.
Yeah.
Viewers.
Yeah, we'll do the rest of that offline. Well, thank you. And I'll just for anyone who's listening who is particularly interested in a little bit of the conversation that we had about social media and that piece, a new book did just come out, Jonathan Haidt. It's called The Anxious Generation. And I would say that for people who are really interested in like, what is this technology? How did it rewire childhood? What are its impacts on me? I would encourage people to look at that book because he has the most comprehensive data sets on what has happened. What does this mean? Where do we go? And I feel like would be like therapeutic for college students to look at this, because I remember when I was in college and Jean Twenge came out with a book that was about millennials, and I read it and there was something about the way that she described my moment, my generation, our technological background, our economic moment, that I felt so like seen in this moment of being like, yeah, this is kind of this interesting, unique backdrop. And I feel like Jonathan Haidt might have kind of done that for you. And so it's an interesting resource.
Now I'm curious.
Yeah, right.
Well, good. Well, thank you guys for having me, and always just feel free to reach out. And I hope that for the listeners, this was fun and insightful. It's fun for me, so I hope it was for others.
It was so
It was
fun
so
for us.
Good. Good.
Thank you so much for coming on.
No problem. No
Appreciate
problem. Yes, of course. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
Yay!
Another episode done.
See you guys
Next week.